The week ends with new reporting revealing a debate inside the White House that is far from settled. While the coronavirus pandemic grips the nation, there is a growing clamor inside the West Wing to reopen the American economy. Per the Washington Post and others, the economy is in free fall, and President Trump feels pressured to resume business activity as soon as next month, especially after the Labor Department said that 6.6 million Americans filed for unemployment last week. The president spoke out Friday about his position, and he was echoed by the Attorney General William Barr earlier in the week.
Your doctors who are gathered here seem to be in doubt as to whether or not the country can reopen on May the 1st. If they come to you before May the 1st and say the country is not ready, or huge parts of the country are not ready to reopen on May the 1st, will you listen to them?
I listen to them about everything. I will certainly listen.
You take that
There
advice.
are two sides. Remember, I understand the other side of the argument very well.
When this period of time, at the end of April, expires, I think we have to allow people to adapt more than we have, and not just tell people to go home and hide under the bed.
But the president's own experts are more cautious, and they're unwilling to commit to any date until they see more data.
This is not the time to feel that since we have made such important advance in the sense of success of the mitigation, that we need to be pulling back at all.
Four top reporters now join us to discuss these tensions and other issues. Yasmeen Abutaleb, health policy reporter for The Post. Karl Hulse, chief Washington correspondent for the New York Times. Amna Nawaz, senior national correspondent for the PBS NewsHour. And Jonathan Karl, chief White House correspondent for ABC News and author of Front Row at the Trump Show, now a New York Times bestseller. Good evening to you all. Yasmeen, you've been reporting on the task force all week. We saw all smiles today at the White House with Dr. Fauci and President Trump. But what's going on behind the scenes? Are they winning the argument to keep the country closed down for weeks?
I think we're going to have to wait and see. You know, some sources I've spoken to have pointed to the fact that President Trump before was pointing to Easter as an opening date. It seemed like that was inevitable, and then, you know, they managed to talk him out of that. I think the health officials do agree you do need to reopen the country at some point, but you need to do it in a way that's safe and methodical, and you make sure you have all the right pieces in place. And right now, you know, the understanding is, and the agreement is, they certainly do not have all the pieces in place to be able to do it safely. You know, broader testing so you can make sure you don't have new outbreaks, contact tracing, tests to figure out who has immunity to the virus. None of that stuff is in place. It's being discussed, but it's certainly not going to be ready by the end of the month or at the beginning of next month.
John, when you think about the economic task force the president announced today, will that be competing with the health experts about this timeline for reopening the economy?
I think there's no question about it, and the president has been hearing it throughout this period, even before he made the decision to go from April 15th to April 30th. There have been two camps, and the president has had advisors from the start, Robert, who have made the case that really the beginning of this was also an overreaction. That's their view, and they believe, and this is largely on the economic team, that you've got to have some kind of a reopening by April 30th, and clearly that is not the direction that the medical experts are pointing to. So I think this will be a battle that will pit largely the economic team versus the healthcare team. And I am not sure where the president goes on this. You know, on one hand, Robert, he sounds like he's getting ready to call for an opening. He's saying once again, the problem can't be worse than the cure. He is sounding like somebody who wants to do that. But at every major decision point so far, he has actually listened to the healthcare experts.
But on the business side, John, who's he listening to? Who has his ear? Is it Secretary Mnuchin? Is it friends on Wall Street?
Well, certainly Secretary Mnuchin's an important part of this, but he works the phones. You know how he works, and his friends not just on Wall Street, but his friends elsewhere in the business world. He's talking to them. He's hearing from them, and he's hearing a lot of arguments in favor of getting the country back to work again. And he's also hearing warnings that doing that too soon could be counterproductive and perhaps disastrous.
But Amna, I was watching you on NewsHour yesterday. You were talking to Governor Tate Reeves of Mississippi, And as much as President Trump wants to make this decision about reopening the economy, it's governors in a lot of these states who will make the decision about their own states and when they reopen. What did he tell you, and what are you learning as you report on the governors about whether they will listen to the president or not?
Yeah, you're seeing governors sort of on the front lines of this in terms of making the decisions about how they're going to be handling the cases, the infection rates, the testing, the procurement of all the PPE, that protective medical equipment their frontline workers need. The governors are really on the front end of the tip end of the spear on all of this. Tate Reeves yesterday was telling me, look, a lot of the same arguments we've been hearing from the president, which is that he waited 3 weeks before they had their very first confirmed coronavirus case before he issued a statewide shelter in place. And the reason for that was something we've heard from the White House, was that he said, I don't think we should be doing this for weeks and weeks on end, because we're going to have an economic disaster on the back end. So this huge debate has emerged now, which is, which disaster do you mitigate? Do you try to address the health disaster, which we know is spreading around the country, and really kind of stop the economy in its tracks to be able to do that first? Or do you try to kind of do both things at the same time? Do you worry about the economic fallout and not take as many aggressive steps to address the health fallout early on? Of course, the health experts will say you can't address the economic fallout before you address the health fallout. And we don't even have a good sense of what's needed to address the health disaster right now. We have no idea how widespread these cases might be. In Mississippi, they've even said, Governor Reeves told me yesterday, they were late to start testing. They didn't start until after those cases in early March. They don't have nearly the testing kits that they need to be able to figure out exactly how widespread it is. And that led to sort of a patchwork of responses across the state before the governor stepped in.
Hey, Karl, when you talk to your sources on Capitol Hill, many Republicans are telling me privately that they're a little nervous about President Trump's decision here because their own electoral fates are on the line, tied in with whatever the president does. So what's the White House hearing from top Republicans in Congress and Democrats?
I think what they're hearing from the Republicans, and what I was hearing this week, is that they have to get these tests, the antibody test, to show that people have been infected and maybe they're safe to go back. I heard this repeatedly from Republican senators saying this is the key. We've got to get that going. We need to have millions of these by Memorial Day. So that's where they're focused right now. I think they'd be very nervous about reopening and have this another spike later on in the year, closer to the election. They know they're actually in pretty big trouble on the Hill right now in terms of holding on to their majority. You saw some rating shift on Senate races this week. The president's trying to bolster these endangered Republicans, announcing, I'm sending X number of ventilators to Colorado, I'm sending X to Arizona. But I think there's a lot of unease. People are pulling back from the idea already that the Congress would come back April 20th. So I think they're probably signaling to the president, let's slow down until we know exactly what's going to happen, because not only is your political fortunes at stake, but ours are too.